So I have a correction. Yaya and Paige will be reading our family history. Yeah.
Say a little louder.
Okay, I got you, alright. Now can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Everybody- No?
No.
Guys, we're turning
No.
back.
Talk louder. Well,
Okay, can y'all hear me now? That's good?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. How everybody doing?
Good, good.
Okay. Alright, so, sorry, today, how did it start? Alright, so, the Davis family history. As prepared years ago by sons of Thomas Davis Jr. Let's begin with our grandfather, Thomas Davis, Sr. He was born a slave somewhere in Washington, Georgia, on a plantation. When he was still in his teens, he led a group of slaves in their bid for freedom by escaping to the north. Their plans called for pepper in their pockets to put in their tracks to confuse the dogs that they knew would follow them, and salt to season anything that they could find to eat along the way. A few days after the escape, they were almost caught when a search party came within 100 yards of where they were hiding. By divine providence, the dogs backtracked them and went in the direction from which they had come. With this close call, they fled into a deep swamp and spent quite a few days with the snakes and wild animals. One of the life-giving incidents of this trip north was that someone in the group spotted a huge hog feeding near the swamp. They caught the hog, killed it, and dragged it deep into the swamp, where they had built a fire and cooked it. The meal was sweet potatoes and roast pork. We're not sure where they got the sweet potatoes. There was a twinkle in Grandfather Thomas's eye when he said, "Son, I don't remember eating anything that tastes so good." Traveling by night and resting through the day, they made it safely through several states to the north. The Civil War had started, so once in the north, Grandfather Thomas joined the Union Army. The story is told that before he took the name Davis, his family name was Turner. His father was held in the Tidewater area in Virginia and was sold to a slave owner farther south. Due to the notoriety that resulted from the Nat Turner incident, all members of the family took another name. However, over the years, this story has been handed down as being true. Our late Uncle Solomon used Turner as a middle name, and he constantly boasted that Turner was the original family name. Grandpa served as a regular in the Army of Engineers, reaching the rank of corporal. Primarily, his duties were serving, and he fought in both battles of Bull Run and remained a part of the Army of the Potomac for quite some time. When they mounted a southern offensive, he was used as a scout because of his knowledge of the Georgia territory. He came with General Sherman in his march to the sea, first through Atlanta, then on to Savannah. He remained in the military until he completed his term. Savannah was his first love, and he decided that it was the place that he wanted to live permanently. His first home was on Pearl Street near Bull. This was just out of the area where the black soldiers were billeted. Their camp was located where the Granger track is presently. Across Bull Street was known as Kingsville. Grandpa was a charter member of the first free black church in North America, the First Bryan Baptist Church. This church was in existence during slavery, and when they received their charter, he was one of their deacons. Years later, he organized a prayer house in Kingsville where he lived. This was known as Bryan Prayer House. Little is known of Grandpa's first marriage, but it's alleged that he was married and had one daughter. This daughter's name was Mary. Her mother died when she was quite young. His second wife, our grandmother, was Margaret Cashman of Augusta, Georgia, and she raised his daughter and had 8 children of her own. 3 of her children died in infancy, and another son, Seabert, died of a rattlesnake bite when he was in his late teens. Grandpa and his son Thomas were also bitten by rattlesnakes, but they survived. This left one daughter, Clara, and 3 sons, Charles, Solomon, and Thomas. The Davis family lived in Kingsville until all of the children were on their own, but Thomas, who was the youngest. They then built a house in South Savannah just west of Tatumsville. During the early days of residence in this area, Grandpa took Thomas to a spot in the woods a short distance from their house. They knelt down, and the old man prayed and announced to the boy that he was going to build a church on this spot. It will be a church without money or price, where people can come and serve God without having to pay, he said. The first church was a small building that was rolled to the spot. This served until a building could be erected.
One of his longtime friends, Reverend Thomas Maddox, said that Grandpa cut some crooked seals and joists for the foundation, but they were straightened out after a while, and a small church stood on the lot. At the outset during Grandpa's lifetime, the building was faced east and west, and he insisted on keeping it that way. But necessity forced them to turn the building so that they could get more on the lot. Grandpa had no formal education. He could neither read nor write, but he was good with figures. His wife, however, our grandmother, was far superior to most blacks of her time in the education department. Her talents for speaking and singing were exceptional. She taught her 3 sons to sing like birds. Her daughter, Clara, was equally as talented. Grandpa benefited from his wife and daughter's talents. They taught him all of the standard hymns, songs, as well as many passages of the scripture. He had such a phenomenal memory that few people who saw him conduct services knew that he could not read. Grandpa was preceded in death by his wife and then his daughter. He died in 1932. They put 97 on his death certificate, but his true age was not known. They put a headstone on his grave, although his orders were, "Don't put any stones on me and dress me in my clothes, so when God calls me, I can come busting out of that grave." During the latter years of his life, Grandpa was known far and near as Pa Davis. Most people just said Pa. He was involved in church and spoke with such authority that most people thought he was a minister, but he was a deacon and church leader. Charlie, Grandpa's oldest surviving son, had a lot of charisma and cut quite a figure in his day with the ladies. He was a born gentleman, and to know him was to love him. As a young man, he was the epitome of a good time Charlie. He married Mamie Rogers of Darien, Georgia, and that union was blessed with a daughter, Sadie, who was the first grandchild of Thomas and Margaret Davis. Today, she is Mrs. Clarence Steele and the senior member of the Davis family. Charlie married again and in later years and fathered a number of children, all girls, by his second wife, Evelyn Dukes West. Evelyn has a daughter, Evelyn by a previous marriage. The children resulting from the second union were Alice, Gloria, Rose, Ollie, Martha, Charlesetta, and Margaret Eva. Another daughter, Mary, died during their childhood. Charles fathered another daughter, Anna Vera, through his union with Bessie Staley. Charles returned to the household of faith during his later years and could really stir one in song sessions. He died in 1952. Solomon was different in many ways. He was Mr. Business. Saul was always hardworking, thrifty, and temperamental, but had his tender moments, and at those times he was warm and loving. He was an early alumnus of Georgia State College and possessed a great deal of business know-how. Saul was a bricklayer by trade, but was handy at a number of things. As a young man, he married Mary Stafford of Hilton Head, South Carolina. This marriage lasted 25 years before ending in divorce. He later married Lily Major, who gave birth to twins, of which only one survived. There were 2 single births, leaving them with a boy, Solomon Jr., and a girl, Lillian Margaret. Solomon came up in the Baptist church, but switched to the Seventh-day Adventist church and was a very devout member until he lost his life in a tragic fire in 1968 that destroyed his home and which still remains a mystery. The youngest, Thomas, upon conversion in Jerusalem Baptist Church, was baptized as the first member of Davis Art Baptist Church. He was a deacon in Davis Art. He preached through a trumpet and was ordained as a minister in Davis Art. Tom pastored a number of churches throughout the area: Jonesville, Saxville, Kingston, and Montgomery. Finally, he became the pastor of Davis Art. When Tom was 20 years old, he married his childhood sweetheart, Bessie Maloney, who was 16. They had 12 children, 11 of whom survived. They are in order: Frank, Thomas, Edward, Evelyn, Richard, Lucy, Clara, Mary, Naomi, Sarah, and Elizabeth. The 12th, a son, James, was stillborn. After Bessie died of cancer at the age of 60, Thomas married Victoria Wilson. She was his wife when he died on June 26, 1975, at the age of 80, leaving a 3rd generation to carry on. We might find it a little difficult to trace our route, but we do have some knowledge of our relatives. Our generation has failed to keep in touch with those who we know, but we are in touch with some that we know. Close relatives in Savannah are children of Bird Davis, who was Grandpa's nephew. Eddie Davis Sr. is another nephew. The Howards of Milledgeville, Georgia, represents nephews and the Rivers, grannies, and a host of cousins in Augusta, Georgia.
Hey, let's give Paige and Yaya big hands because we're going to depend on them to continue the legacy of the Davis family.
That's right. Yeah.
It's going to be these guys going to continue the legacy. So thank you all.